Welcome back one and all, and thank you so much for joining me on today's, shall we say, festive tour. We are in the Woodford Valley today. It's quite an emotional place for me. I love the Woodford Valley. It brings us straight back to Salisbury, the land of the Salisbury organist, and no more so than here, because I used to be the organist in the Woodford Valley churches. There are 3 of them, All Saints Middle Woodford, St Andrew's Church in Great Durnford, and St Michael's Church in Wilsford. And it's Wilsford that we're visiting today. This place is also emotional because this is where my family often goes out for walks. There are some spectacular footpaths around the Woodford Valley. And to me, I would call this a theme park that nobody's discovered. There is no one here. I'm sure people are at work and things, and shopping and all of those kinds of things. When I think of all of the people in the shopping centres buying Christmas presents, desperately trying to find something, let's face it, that's true. And then I think of this landscape, with not a human in sight, just sheep, farm buildings, swaying trees, dense cloud, and autumn leaves. Is there really anywhere better that you could be? Even on a day like this, which I would describe as bitterly cold, partly because of the wind, and my hair must be going crazy right now. This farm track takes us up to the top of the hill and then back down again into the valley below. And it's this sheltered valley which houses so many villagers of the parish, and it's where all of the churches are, near the river. And to my left, we're just about to reach a view of a world-famous monument. A monument which you queue for a long while to see, and you pay to see, but you don't have to pay to see it today. That's if we can see it. It's not so clear on overcast days like this. Let's take a look. I'm going to have to put down the camera and try and shoot this magical ancient masterpiece on my phone. I don't think we have the range on the main camera. Let's give this a go. And you can see it, can't you? Yes, you can see the A303, which runs towards Exeter, but behind it you can see something far more impressive, and that is Stonehenge. And look at all the people gazing at those stones. Do you think they could ever imagine that there's a chap stood here from miles away looking at them on a field edge? And then all of you as well. I'm quite satisfied by that thought. But there we are, Stonehenge. It's tempting to walk inside this shaded avenue of trees to get out of the wind, but I fear then all you'll hear is rustling rather than what I'm trying to say. It's probably best to stay on the tarmac, or what they describe in rambling books as the metalled lane. I'm sure you know a lot about Stonehenge, and perhaps its origins. I don't know. The stones themselves weigh between 25 and 30 tons, and given that it was about 2,500 BC when they were brought from the Marlborough Downs to their place over there, it's hard to imagine how they achieved that incredible feat without modern tools. I think it was erected before the invention of the wheel, in fact. Unbelievable achievement. And as I pass the farm buildings, the wind seems to have ceased for a moment, and the views are amazing. Just behind that piece of farm machinery. What's that called? Anybody know? I'd love to broaden my knowledge. What is that? As we pass beyond the views of Stonehenge, it's funny how the cars that were going past the stones all slow down to look at them. I wonder if you knew that during the First World War there was an aerodrome called Stonehenge Aerodrome for training those pilots who dropped bombs. It was only 300 metres from the stones themselves. And then the following year there was a restoration or a renovation of Stonehenge. The stones were in quite a bad shape in 1900, and it was about 1918 that they started to straighten them up, put stones back that had fallen over, and they actually concreted them in. Bet you didn't know that. If you want to know what they looked like before, with a bit of artistic license, take a look at John Constable's watercolour of Stonehenge from 1835. I think he was attracted to ruins like that. It was only about, I think, 7 years after his wife had died that he painted that, and I wonder whether he saw a kind of melancholy in English ruins. There's actually a quote from John Constable when he exhibited that picture, which says, "The mysterious monument of Stonehenge, standing remote on a bare and boundless heath, as much unconnected with the events of past ages as it is with uses of the present, carries you back beyond all historical records into the obscurity of a totally unknown period." And now we descend into the valley, and hopefully we'll find some more shelter and smoke billowing out from a chimney, or perhaps more likely a bonfire down in the valley adds its own charm to the landscape. At last reaching the final section of the route as we descend towards St. Michael's. Unsurprisingly, it's one of the most isolated churches in Salisbury. There's a book by Simon Jenkins, who's quite an eminent church historian, called England's 1,000 Best Churches. And it's always interesting to see how few of them feature on my videos, because his criteria doesn't quite match up with mine. I think Simon Jenkins is most interested in the historical significance or the preserved nature of many ancient churches, perhaps. Whereas for me, it's all about where they are sited. If a church has a particularly peaceful atmosphere, or remoteness, or tranquility, or a wonderful church organ, then it will be one of my 1,000 best churches. Maybe I should write my own book. While I'm on this walk, and before we reach the church, it's worth me actually mentioning, and I hope people haven't skipped through this part, because people tend to skip all the way to the church and miss the things I say before I reach it, which is a shame. But anyway, let me tell you how I actually started as a YouTube filmmaker. It was completely by accident, but as you can imagine, it completely chimes with my enjoyment of the countryside and my dislike of concert performing. I'd much rather perform to you through a lens. Anyway, YouTube started for me because during the COVID pandemic, performing wasn't allowed. So all of the church services that took place here, for which I would have played the organ, went online. I'm getting some shelter to finish this tale. Here we are. It doesn't feel much warmer though. All of those services went online, so the parishioners could log on to a kind of portal and watch the sermon and the prayers being spoken online, live actually, in a program called Zoom. And I had to record hymns for them to sing along to. So instead of playing live and turning up in a suit to play, I would do exactly the same, but I would turn up at the church with a big key, because it would have been locked. I'd go in with a microphone and a camera, in fact it was this camera, still use it, and I would record 4 hymns for the service and an organ voluntary, which is the piece that's played at the end. And when I started doing all of this, it was incredibly difficult. It was so hard, I just couldn't play to a lens and record myself. I just kept making mistakes. You watch it back and think, nope, not good enough, do it again, and get colder and colder. But eventually I could do it in one take. And it was at that point that I decided I would like to express myself more. And how could I do that? Aside from playing the music how I wanted to play it, how about talking about the music? An anecdote about the composer, or some technique about how you play the church organ. And I was noticing that the parishioners were quite enjoying these introductions to my voluntaries, which I never would have been able to do in a normal service. And I think it gave some comfort to people as well, I hope, in that rather isolated time. Unfortunately, isolation is a word which really still exists nowadays, doesn't it? A lot of people work from home. I don't think people meet other people in the same way as they used to. I mean, it saves employers a lot of money, people not having to go into work. And because of technological advance, fewer people are required for a job, some are replaced by computers. And things have changed. But anyway, I think that was how my YouTube channel started. And on that note, we turn off the road and down towards St. Michael's Church. So this, friends, is the church where I recorded all of those early lockdown recordings. And I chose this one because it had the best pipe organ, and also because it was the most remote, the most peaceful. I love coming out to churches like this one, as you can imagine. In fact, I actually recorded a CD in aid of Salisbury District Hospital called Organ Stops, which of course is a pun, should I explain it? You weren't allowed to sing hymns, therefore the organs fell silent during that period. And the CD sold out completely by Christmas. The wind has certainly calmed down now as we reach the elegant porch of St. Michael's. And stepping through the door, which I would come in once a week. Usually on a Friday morning, about 9 o'clock, I would come out here in all weathers and record the music for the Sunday service. Always so peaceful and tranquil. You can tell that this church is really another Victorian renovation. It was carried out by an architect called T.H. Wyatt. The 12th century tower remains. You can see the very old archway here. But most of this church dates from the middle of the 19th century. But it's a stunning example of a Victorian church. A few of these pews here might date from the 17th century, but otherwise Victorian. The east window is almost like a miniature of the east window of Salisbury Cathedral. I love to think of the way this network of churches all revolve around that amazing building. These pockets of the countryside that are rarely seen. But if you are coming over from a different country, do come to this church. In the chancel here on the walls we have quotes from Keats. It says here, "Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on." And on the subject of music, let's now turn to the organ. In a moment, Sophia will be coming in to help me. The reason why it's amazing having her here for some of these trips is because I'm completely free to talk about the instrument and you can see the instrument in its entirety. Otherwise, I have to keep cutting between pictures of my face and pictures of the organ, which feels very unnatural to watch. And right on cue. Now that everything is set up, we can show you this organ built by J.W. Walker in 1858. So this instrument was built pretty much the same time that the entire church would have been restored. If you're interested, this was built exactly the same year as the same firm constructed the instrument at Romsey Abbey, not far from here. This organ has 2 keyboards and a full-size pedal board, so it's a complete luxury for me to play this. It was quite tricky last week because we played 2 organs which didn't have pedal boards, which I can't quite get to grips with because I'm so used to playing with my feet. And on that subject, can I draw your attention to something very mundane but actually quite useful? These are specialist organ shoes. When I say specialist, I mean they're just the shoes that I use to play the organ in, and they have to be different to the shoes that I walked here in. These are far too clumpy to play the pedals. By contrast, these shoes, which were freshly polished this morning, don't have a big welt on the side, so they're much better for playing organ pedals with. And alongside those pedals, there are some more pedals made of metal. Those are called toe levers. They change the combinations of stops when you press them with your feet. So that one draws the oboe on its own for the full chorus of the organ. The oboe is really used either as a solo sound or for a full fortissimo on a church organ. And then the other 2 operate the grate side. So if you don't have your hands free, it's a good way of changing the sound. And to the right, we also have the swell pedal. That's called a ratchet swell. It's either open or closed, or there are a couple of notches halfway to control the shutters of the organ. So if I close it completely, the organ is quiet, and I'll demonstrate that with the softest sound. If you open it, the organ is louder. So that's the pedals, the toe pistons and the swell pedal. So that's the whole department down below the keyboard sorted. We have the usual arrangement of grate and swell. Interestingly, on this instrument, the keys are really tricky for some reason to play. There's something about how they're made, the size of them. It's very easy to accidentally catch the black notes when you play one of the white notes. I always remember that the hardest hymn to record in this church was Lord of All Hopefulness, because there are lots of E flat chords where your finger is right up to the top of the keyboard. And that means that your index finger catches on the adjacent notes far too easily. There you go, that's me demonstrating how not to play an organ. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate this organ, first of all, with two pieces, a loud one and a soft one. And let's start with the loud one, shall we? This is In Dulce Jubilo by Bach. It's a really popular piece to play at Christmas. I'll tell you why. It's short, it's based on a recognisable tune, and it works on a village church organ. There's all these composers called things like Dupré and Vierne and Derouflé, but I've never actually learned any of their music. I've only ever learned pieces by composers like Bach, because it tends to work much better on organs like this one. Vierne is just far too complicated to play in a village, and the chances are you'll lose the congregation. These organs just weren't made for it. But say if you're playing a piece like this at the end of a service, you use the good old open diapason and the principal. If you just used the principal, it would sound far too light. And if you just used the open diapason, it would be too mellow. But if you use them together, it's a bright sound. And then what you would do is add some swell to that. So you've got the same pitches, 8 and 4. And then you actually couple them directly down to the great. So swell to great. And that physically couples it down. Notice that the keys actually get drawn down. Makes the organ louder. And you do exactly the same with the pedals. So you couple down the lowest keyboard to the pedals, and then when I play a note, you can see the manuals get drawn down. So it's all physically coupled together. So you'll know this tune. I love the creak of the bellows as the organ wheezes from the strain of playing that piece. Bach's In Dulce Jubilo. And now it's time for the quiet piece, which is by César Franck. So for this, we need a different kind of principle. We need a solo accompanied with something quieter, and the accompaniment will be the flute. But we'll close the box just a bit, just so it isn't too overpowering. And the theme will be played on the stopped diapason. So we have the pedal bass, but now we've got to couple the swell to the pedals on their own, so that essentially the accompaniment and the pedals are working together. I could use the oboe, by the way, as the tune, but it's slightly out of tune. That's okay. That's okay actually, isn't it? It's not too bad. Let's try that then the other way round, so using the oboe as the solo. So we'll swap everything around now. Let's try that. So we have solo oboe, accompaniment flute. And if you were really nifty, you'd be able to close the swell box at the end there to create a gradual diminuendo, so the music dies away. Let's try that. This is a really important part of organ playing technique, so let's see it again from the other side. So that shows you that a lot more can be achieved on an organ with 2 keyboards compared to an organ with just 1. And for me, it's much more comfortable playing an instrument which has pedals. And with that in mind, we can't leave this secretive village church without playing one of my all-time favourite Christmas carols. I hope you're enjoying this Christmas Carol tour so far, and can I just say what an absolute joy it is to produce these videos every week and to read all of your comments. I love reading your comments. If there's any part of these videos which capture your imagination, please write something below. I would love to read it. We have 2 more churches to visit on this particular episode, and may I say you will not be disappointed. But before we head off to Dorset, it's really important for me to say this. These tours of churches are not sponsored by anybody. I'm completely independent and I'm the person who funds them. An American viewer suggested to me, why don't you have a PayPal link so that people can support you? And I soon found out that PayPal is just a fantastic way of doing that. Because wherever you are in the world, if you're enjoying these tours and if the music means something to you, you can help support me with a small donation. And none of that is sent off somewhere else. It goes directly to me and to support my work. If you'd like to do that, you'll find a link underneath this video. And if you click on that, it takes you to the Salisbury Organist donations page. And from there, you can leave a small donation if you're enjoying my work. I love making slightly longer videos nowadays, so that you can either watch them in one go on a Sunday evening, or maybe come back to them halfway through to watch the second half. It's really fulfilling for me to do that, but of course it does take much more of my time, and it's all at my own expense. So if you enjoy this and you'd like to support me, I would be truly grateful. For now, it's time to head to our second village, and you'll be familiar with this one. That's because I came here last week. Do you remember I started composing a Christmas lullaby here at Winterbourne Stickland? Finished off at home and then recorded at Lover Church. Well, en route to our final village, I wanted to stop off here and play it on those lovely flute sounds which inspired it. We don't have long and there's a big rainstorm forecast later in the day, but I can't resist. Okay, we're on. This is going to be super quick. You remember last time we came to this church, it was later in the afternoon, and the church was at some point going to lock. But I started writing the Christmas lullaby in this very church. And all I want to do here, en route to our next village, is just play it on the church organ where it was originally written. It would be nice to hear how it sounds here. So we pull open the keyboard and we've got these lovely flute sounds. I might not get this right first time, but let's try it. This is the Christmas lullaby. Next, it's onwards towards Woodland, a hidden village on the edge of Dorset's famous Bullbarrow Hill. Sometimes there is nothing so relaxing as a car journey, and with views like this, it certainly didn't disappoint. I wonder if you can share my absolute awe right now. I'd say joy, but I'm not smiling. That's because I'm just in complete reverence for this landscape. You've just seen the drive down towards the village of Woodland, which is where I'm heading now, on foot. I don't normally show driving on this channel anymore because it's too modern. I'd much rather walk. I prefer to take in the scenery at this pace. But you could see from the car that the landscape is so undulating and magnificent in this area. And it's even better when you've never seen it before. I feel like Jack Hargreaves advancing across this hilly landscape towards the village. In fact, if you don't know who Jack Hargreaves is, you should look him up and watch his brilliant videos in the Old Country and Out of Town series. This is where they were filmed, and he lived just over there in Chalwell. We're on our way to the chapel in Woodland, really the village church, although it doesn't seem to have a dedication. It's a much more modern building than what we've seen in the past. It was built in the 19th century. It's a Victorian church designed by George Gilbert Scott. He was a prolific architect. He's known to have either designed or altered about 800 buildings. Early in his career, he was responsible for workhouses, but he was a proponent of the Gothic revival style, and he's responsible for lots of churches and even some cathedrals as well. Not just in England, I think in Hamburg, St. Nicholas's Church was designed by Sir Gilbert Scott. At the time it was the tallest building in the world, 147 metres. I couldn't get my head around that in a city environment, because I think of Salisbury Cathedral, which is 123 metres. But it's got space around it, whereas in a big city, I can't quite imagine the sight of this incredibly high spire. The church was really bombed out in the Second World War during the air raids of Hamburg, and it was only the spire which remained unscathed, and nowadays it's a memorial and a museum. So that's some of the background to George Gilbert Scott. I've never actually been to Germany. In fact, I've only ever been abroad twice. I don't really go abroad much. You can see why when you watch this channel. I quite like finding complete beauty and surprises of the countryside as close as I can to home. This is of course still the Diocese of Salisbury, and there's plenty to enjoy here. We're just approaching the village now, and it's just beginning to rain as well. As I reach the village lane, Woodland's own miniature spire comes into view. The chapel here was built in 1856, but it's apparently the fourth church to have stood on this site. In fact, much of the stone here comes from an earlier building. We are struck by the interior, lavish and ornate, with oak pews, Bath stone columns and a chancel fashioned from Devon and Purbeck marble. The same year as the church's construction, an organ-building firm named Wheatstone & Co. were advertising their 10-guinea Harmonium from premises in London's Regent Street. This Harmonium was probably built a little bit later, but it draws us right into the sound world of Victorian church music. These instruments are always really ergonomic. They were built in their millions, actually, in the 19th century. They were really, really popular. I've talked all the time about why they're so popular. You can see how small it is, but it also makes quite a lot of noise for something so small, and you can pump it yourself. So it's incredibly practical. In Thomas Hardy's Under the Greenwood Tree, set in Dorset, it was a harmonium which replaced the group of musicians. It wasn't a pipe organ. So this contains reeds rather than pipes, and they don't really go out of tune, certainly not enough to be unable to use them, so they're really practical. If I could find something to sit on, then we can test this organ out.
A stool or a high chair?
The stool will do us. The first thing I really want to do to test it out is to play the same piece that you heard earlier at Wilsford Church by César Franck, his Noël in G minor, because that would have been written for an organ like this one. It would have been written, of course, for a French harmonium because César Franck was French, but this one was built in London. Naturally, I'm too eager to perform and I muddle up all the stops. You should always experiment with the sounds before playing, so that you know which combinations work best. After that, the organ will begin to sound more and more magical, and in this case, more French. Yeah, so we have a voix céleste, which is a stringy sound, which means celestial voice. What a fantastic name for an organ stop. So it's a very heavenly sound, an undulating sound, and it works really well here at Woodland. It's quite rare for this sort of organ to sound so nice as this. It's obviously been looked after. In fact, it says on this business card that it's been attended to fairly recently. I love the fact there are all these orchestral kinds of sounds, like a clarinet and an oboe. That's the clarinet, or the oboe. And that does really sound exactly like an oboe. That's because there are reeds in here, just like the reed on an oboe. And the usual diapason sounds that all church organs have, you also get on this organ. I don't know what they sound like though. That's the kind of sound that you'd play an organ voluntary on. We also have a bassoon and an aeroplane. So it's almost like a drone. So playing the harmonium's completely different to playing the pipe organ because you can be much more expressive actually on a harmonium in different ways. You can pump the pedals in different ways and that produces different effects, which you of course can't really do on a normal pipe organ. If you're pumping a church organ with pipes and you stop pumping, then air comes out of the pipes and they just go flat. Whereas with reeds, the more or less air that's pushed through those reeds just makes them louder or softer. So it's almost as expressive as a human voice. I'd like to play a carol on this organ. It's got quite an evocative, dark, moody tone to it. So it really brings to mind a minor key carol like Coventry Carol, for example. I absolutely love this instrument. You might wonder why I say this is such a glorious, brilliant musical instrument, because of course it's not completely in tune and it sounds a bit fuzzy even. It sounds a bit like a distorted speaker in some ways, almost like a synthesizer. But it's all those imperfections that make it really evocative to play. It inspires certain kinds of music. And if somebody walked in this building and heard it playing, I hope they'd think, wow, what on earth is that? Because it's nothing like what you might hear in a cathedral, which is just also perfect. It's all of the imperfections of the sounds that make it sound so emotional. Let's try some of the other sounds with the same piece. There I was using all the weightiest tones, like the bourdon and the diapasons, and I had the voix celeste out as well. But maybe if we try using the clarinet and the diapason without any of the weighty stuff, let's just see how it sounds then. A lot plainer, I imagine. And then I'll take off the clarinet. As you know, I could play that instrument for hours, but it's time to stop. I love harmoniums so much. The most underrated but beautiful musical machine ever invented, in my opinion. So how do I end this Christmas episode? Well, I've got the perfect way. One of my favourite Christmas carols, and a montage or a collage of this season's Advent and Christmas films. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Christmas to you all.